Welcome back to On the Horizon podcast, hosted by Jessie Sage and Melrose Michaels. First, thank you so much for becoming a premium subscriber and supporting our podcast. This is getting you extra exclusive, unheard, and unseen footage from each interview that we have on the horizon.
Sonora Grace is a sex worker, sexological body worker, somatic sex educator, ritualist, bee tender, and artist living and working in Bulbancha, colonially known as New Orleans. I was having this conversation with a student actually who was interviewing me about sex work the other day. And one of the things that she was surprised to hear me say is that, like, I have a lot of clients, a lot of male clients who like have almost been embarrassed about the fact that they're like, I actually like, can we not do the like sexting? What they mean is like PIV, you know, and because they either have like erectile dysfunction issues or they have a hard time coming and it just becomes like frustrating for them, or like there's all sorts of like reasons that they're like trying to think of like other ways like around it, but they don't know how to do that in their regular relationship. So they're like, come to these encounters that they're paying for and be like, well, can I just serve you? Or can we like do something else that's sexy and hot, but not have sex? And I think that there's like, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this, like move away from, you know, like it's almost like a reversal of how we think about like the evolution of like sexual development. Cause like, I don't want to put a lot of like emphasis on Freud, but like Freud talks about how like when babies are born, they feel pleasure like all over their bodies. And then as we move along, it becomes like oral and then like anal and then genital. And then we're focusing all of our attention on like genital pleasure. But to get back to like the full body pleasure, it's actually pulling away from that.
Yeah. I love that you said that. That's like, I would say that's a huge part of my clientele base anyway, especially because I advertise as like in the healing world, but also even before that, it was like people who are coming because they have maybe some other need, whether it's like shame about something or something that they haven't been able, to like you said, express to their partners. And I think that actually it points to like the service that we fill as sex workers. Like there's a need in our society for people who need to, just like you would go to a therapist for emotional like problems, or if you want to learn how to cook, you would go to get cooking classes or whatever the thing is, you would just go find a professional in that field. And that is often like our role. And I often laugh because also we have deemed like mental or emotional issue, instability or these things as issues and something is wrong with you. And so a lot of times, especially if you're a cis man, you're probably not going to go to a therapist because that something is wrong with you, but you're more likely to go see a provider and tell them all of your stuff because that's like where it's safe enough too.
When you're like creating this like intimacy with strangers, and I've found that like oftentimes it like helps me to like tap into like intimacy that I've had in my real life too. Like absolutely. To draw like those sorts of, to draw on those memories, like you were saying, like memories in your body, to draw on those memories, to like somehow channel that sort of energy so that you can be there for somebody who you don't yet have that with.
Or just hearing a client's fantasy and being like, ooh, I could be really into that. Like, okay, come here, honey. Like, I got an idea.
The other way too.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also interesting because I've been trying this thing where I work a lot with, I don't know if you've heard of Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent before.
No.
It's like a really powerful tool. If you Google her, she's got a ton of free videos and ways to really, what she's doing is she's really breaking apart how we give and receive pleasure, and not so it's consent in the ways that we know it, but it's also in this way of like, what does it really mean to like to take pleasure and give pleasure in a consensual way, and am I clear, who is this for, and is it for me, is it for them? Like if I'm touching your arm, is that for me or is it for you? And it's a really interesting thing because her work is very embodied. So it's a felt sense of like, is this for me or is this for you? And I used to think a lot in my work that my work was like to give people pleasure. Like if I'm going to touch them, it's for them. And yes, a lot of times that's true, but also what I've been working with is, can I take pleasure from my clients, and can I really like do it in a way that, of course, it's consensual. We have sometimes the word take can have negative connotations, but if it's in a consenting adult relationship, it's like, okay, can be really hot. Like, it's like, I'm going to take from you. And so when I allow myself to take pleasure from my clients, like, I'm fully there. I'm fully like, it's not that it doesn't matter who it is, but it's like the person becomes like, a part of we're connected in a really deep, visceral way. And I really, I find that the more that I'm kind of selfish in the sense of like taking pleasure, the better experience it is for both of us.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's also like great to hear that, because I feel like there's I'm trying to think of the nicest way to say this. On like Twitter, if you spend a lot of time on sex work Twitter, there's a lot of negative feelings like circulated about like clients, and like, oh, like all clients give me is money. And that there's like not a lot of space within like the discourse to talk about like what a good relationship with a client could be, what it would be like to receive like pleasure from like clients, especially like with so many like anonymous hooker accounts now that are like spend all of their time like talking about how terrible
ex-client was,
like how no men know how to like give women pleasure. And I'm like, actually, that's like not true. There, you know, what is happening here that's like creating this like dynamic, which, you know, it's hard to, so I guess what I'm saying to you now that I beat around the bush is that like, I very much appreciate that sort of like openness about like, we can also like have pleasure in these interactions, and that not only does that make it better for us, but it makes us better at like our jobs. And it gives like our clients better experiences.
Well, you want to have an experience where both people are really into it, you know, really enthusiastically, like enjoying themselves. So I can only imagine that amplifies all the experiences, because then you're present, you are there, you are in it, you know, versus if you're just being a provider. I think that's a different dynamic.
And I don't mean to, and I'm not judgy about that. I just feel like, because people are coming at things from so many different perspectives, but I feel like there's very little space to talk about, in our current like climate, to talk about what this pleasure looks like for us.
I wonder if there's also even guilt wrapped up in that, because I know a lot of sex workers too, that if they enjoy their work, that might cross the boundary of it being work. And I think that there's guilt and shame wrapped up in that too. I would imagine. I don't have that experience personally, but I think that's there's room for that too, because I could see that. Like if you are in a committed monogamous relationship and you guys have certain boundaries, and then it's like, well, if I like this, is that bad? Does that become cheating? You know? I'm sure there's that component.
Totally. And I think that's really valid, especially in a world where in general, our joy and our pleasure is not celebrated, and it's kind of like not always like something that you can have guilt-free, you know, we talk about guilty pleasures, and it's like, why should pleasure be guilty? It's like, it's like a fucking beautiful thing that we get to do. And it's better for both people, but it is a thing where like, I mean, it you know, comes with burnout too, of like, if we're not like getting our needs met in our sessions or you know, with our clients or in our lives in general, like, it can lead to like a lot of things. But it, you know, the tricky part I find is like, how do I communicate what I want or need from my client? And I think that's always like the dance I'm doing is like, I'm both facilitating this experience for this person, and it's for them. It's like contractually for them, but it's also like they are going to love it if I love it. And so there's a play of like, how do I take pleasure in an artful way that's like, maybe they don't even know that I'm doing it, because I'm like finding ways to move on their body or move with their body, or that that feel good for me. And I think the biggest like work I've had to do is like really find what I like and what it is that I don't. And you know, I just like try to masturbate as much as possible. and just like really try. I mean, I think I could definitely stand to masturbate more, but like just really self-pleasure and fully, not just my genitals, but like fully pleasure myself as much as possible.
I think that's a great takeaway for all of our listeners. Just please masturbate more.
Yeah. Everyone.
Yeah.
Jessica Stoya started performing in pornographic videos in 2006. Stoya is half of Slate's How to Do It sex advice column and has written about pornography for publications including Playboy, The New York Times, and Jiz Lee's anthology Coming Out Like a Porn Star.
Yeah. So on your column, do people write in and ask you questions, right?
All sorts of questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of like curveballs have you hit up against? Like what sort of questions are you getting that you just can't find answers to?
So it's rare that I just can't find an answer. The question is how much I have to scramble. Because there is a timeline, and it feels like a personal failure to ask my editor for a substitution because I couldn't journalism well enough in time. Like that like digs at my perfectionist streak. But one thing that is a recurring theme, increasingly, and I'd say like the past year, or maybe I've only begun to notice it that much in the past year, people are asking for sexual utopia.
Yeah.
Right. So we had a question from someone whose sexual partner likes to be penetrated in both lower orifices at once. But the letter writer doesn't want to always have to rely on toys. But, you know, it's very awkward to have all of these sort of like extra fingers and like the thumb floating around and all this kind of, and, you know, they don't want sex to be awkward.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so, you know, because of this thing called editing, which when it comes to pornography, we like struggle to apply critical thinking around.
Yeah.
You might have this impression that sex isn't awkward.
Yeah.
But as a person who has worked on several porn sets, I must tell you, it is in fact very awkward.
Yes.
And like, you just like, you don't address the awkwardness or you stop and laugh at the awkwardness. Like, but like, there are many ways to engage or not engage with the awkwardness, but like, I can't tell you how to have never awkward sex because that is not my experience.
Yeah.
Right. Which is probably like a really valuable thing to hear from somebody who they may or may not have like watched have sex and didn't perceive it as like awkward in any way.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a really unfortunate byproduct of the combination of lack of sex ed and ubiquitous access to pornography without any like context to understand it.
Right.
That said, I think my work in the Slate column, I think your work for Peepshow, I think Cherie DeVille's work for
the Daily Beast.
Yes,
Daily Beast.
thank you.
Yeah.
And like all of these, and then of course, all of the sex workers who've been writing for anthologies and our own publications, right? Like Spread was foundational to the way that I approached sex work, activism, and press and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it is changing. I think we are providing context for pornography and sex work slowly, but like it would be a lot better if the people in charge of education would do something to prepare people before they're 18 and interacting with us.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this bonus footage from this episode of On the Horizon, and we look forward to having you tune in next time.